Akamatsuba are fast becoming one of the most popular varieties in koi keeping, certainly here in the UK, but demand globally is also picking up. Otsuka Koi Farm, in my opinion, is the best breeder to go to for this variety. They come from his Asagi bloodline, known as Monbe. We're going to get into that a little bit more later. And throughout the course of this video, we're going to dive into the farm a little bit and the variety, and I'm going to share with you my tips, my secrets for what I'm looking for in prime Tosai examples to grow on into the future. Yoshikazu Otsuka, the current guy running the operation, is actually third generation. His family started off as rice farmers and it progressed into koi. Straight out of high school, he started at the farm and he's been learning ever since. Now, he actually did a 3-year apprenticeship at Isamario. Back then was a really famous farm, now not so much, but they're actually just in the same village, on the same street in Niigata, which is a very, very popular area where densely packed with koi breeders. The bloodline that runs throughout the whole farm is known as Monbe. Now, when you see this spelt, the double E is pronounced in A format in Japanese, just so you've got that clear. This line has a very distinct characteristic. Started with his Asagi, which is what the farm is most renowned for. Again, in my opinion, one of the best in Japan. But one of the biggest characteristics it has is what's known as Otafuku, which is a chubby cheek based face. That's a characteristic he heavily works on and makes sure it's part of his bloodline. Now, that's actually filtered down into his Akamatsuba, because Akamatsuba generally come from a spawning of Asagi. Now, this one at the minute showing the broad long head look, got real width. What it's not got at the moment is the cheeks. The mouth's actually a little bit narrow, but the cheeks will flesh out like the rest of the body will over time. But the head shape and style is a big thing I'm looking at. This characteristic is one of the most imposing you see in his large examples, when you get this very long wide face with a wide mouth and then those chubby cheeks. I absolutely love it. For me, it adds a lot to these Akamatsuba as we go along. Back to the farm, like I say, Monbe is the name. That is the main characteristic I'm looking for. And Asagi now is a big production that he has. The characteristics we're going to show throughout this video, but for me, if you are after one of these, look no further. So this Monbe bloodline, once again, we know there's some of them characteristics. They're phenomenal growers because Asagi, and when I keep referencing Asagi, remember basically Akamatsuba is Asagi. It's just a fully red version. Now, they are the closest linked variety back to the original Magoi, so they're a little bit wild. You'll see throughout today's selections they're a bit jumpy, the water's warm, and the wild nature of the fish causes them to be a little bit manic. Now, Otsuka himself knows that, especially with Asagi, it takes time. You know, it can be 3 years before they actually look any good. One of his best tips, and one I'm taking as well for Akamatsuba, and he gives with Asagi, is rather than buying the one, buy many. So rather than going deeper from a cash perspective into the one fish, buy many and grow them, especially the ones that are more underdeveloped, because neither he or myself can truly know how they're going to turn out. This is a variety you truly can beat the breeder and beat the dealer with by following that methodology and raising the fish through, because they're so hard to predict into the future. A cool little fact about the bloodline, his Asagi bloodline, is how it started. He actually originally purchased 6 to 7 Asagi from an operation known as Miyakoya in Toyama City. He grew these fish on, and one actually, because there was an element of dealing at the farm early doors, he grew the fish on and one actually damaged some scales and became unsellable, and he eventually kept that and used it as his very first pair of fish. And it actually all happened by mistake. It was only because it was damaged he decided to use it for that purpose, and from there created one of the most prominent and best Asagi bloodlines in Japan today. Crazy how a lot of these things start. So this batch of fish arrived with me early this year, and on the 17th of March was the last clip we had of these, when I actually moved the whole batch, 450 fish, into one of my 1200 gallon ponds. Those ponds have delivered insane results. If you followed any of the grow out videos on the channel, you'll see what they've delivered. Last year's Karashigoi series was a phenomenal one, and the results were insane. All 450 have gone in. They haven't been touched since the 17th of March, when they were 10 to 12 cm. And today, finally, we're putting the net in, because they've grown so much. We now need to thin them out, and I need to have a good sort through. I'm hoping as a result today, after the selection, I'm going to cut the stocking in the pond by around half. That's going to allow the rest of these to absolutely fly on. Now, when I'm selecting Akamatsuba, there's some really key characteristics that I look for. And of course, as always, when I'm teaching you this, you have to keep all of this relative to the price of the fish that you're looking at. That's very important, but having the knowledge is also a good thing to help you make the best selection possible depending on where you're at. Just know that the further down the scale is, of course, it's harder to get to the optimum criteria. And in my case, a lot of these fish that I'm keeping, I'm looking that there'll be some valuable Nisai out the end of this. And as I explain in certain parts, there's elements where some of the fish might actually be better suited to you and safer bets than others at the moment. Now, of course, body is always a strong characteristic that I'm looking at. The head shape in particular with Otsuka Akamatsuba is a very, very key one that I want to get right. The batch is quite a mix in size, but keeping steady. I'm currently around 18 to 22 centimeters, which is really good for my average, so I'm not going to focus on any size grading and just quality today. Now, as well as the head and bone structure setup, the big thing I'm looking for is cleanliness on these at the moment. Now, just the same as Asagi, these things naturally darken with age. You've got to bear that in mind. So I have a tendency to want to pick the lightest examples at this point, knowing that they're going to darken over time. Now, the mistake people actually make with these is being drawn to the ones that are naturally more developed with the Matsubamon and the Amime. Amime is the net pattern effect that you see, and the Matsubamon is the black scalation that sits in the back. Knowing that they darken with age, if you go too dark now, that fish within no time is going to completely over darken and look pretty disgusting.
Prime example of one that's very, very low quality. Gone way too dark. So if you're picking them too dark, too young, that's how they can eventually end up.
However, they do tend to be more attractive because they've got the characteristics everybody wants. What you have to understand is the lighter ones eventually will get to the right point, but over a slower period. So it might be at 2 years or 3 years old when it really starts to peak. But then the chances of it over darkening, which it probably will do at some point, but you're probably not going to be until that fish is maybe 6 years or 7 years old. So in my mind, picking them right at this size, you're getting better value for money than getting one that looks the business now but might go downhill quite quickly. So do pay attention to those lighter ones. Not always easy because they're not that easy to read, and there is a sweet spot in this where you get some that are in between, not too dark, but they've got more development of the Matsubamon. And what actually tends to then happen is as it stretches out, that whole pattern will stretch out a little bit and it won't look as dark as it does currently.
This is understanding the Amime, which is the net pattern, combined with the Matsubamon, which is that pattern you're going to get in the back, much more developed in this one. My general selection would be more for this one, lighter, because they will darken with age. Now that's more in the case of Asagi, however. With Akamatsuba, I also need to point out that in some instances this is acceptable where it's darker, because what will happen as this one grows out, this will stay lighter forever and naturally it'll start darkening up. Now there's actually no assurances it'll get all the way to this level. I just prefer them like this because I don't want them to go too dark. In the instance of this one where it's already more developed in the back, what I'm looking for is it not to be too much, so we can see there, look, it's only in the top, halfway down it stops, the head's nice and light. What you can actually see here, this dark area, that's actually the brain and the skull underneath. The colour's not thick enough yet to mask that over, but in the next part of growth, that will completely colour. So just to further reinforce the previous point, what I'm looking for when they are darker in the back is this, you can see there's a light edging around the scales, which will be part of the Amime, the net pattern, a bit later on. Now again, the head's nice and clean, I'm happy with that. The colour sits halfway, there's nice brightness to the colour as well, which is important. So what will actually happen as that grows, and they're going to be growing at a pace, it's actually going to stretch everything out and actually stretch this dark back, and the Matsubamon will reveal itself and get that amazing pattern, what we love to see in these examples.
So you will notice as I'm selecting them, the primary ones I'm looking for are the lighter ones, but the darker ones I have got a preference to keep some of, but I won't go too dark. And when they are darker, what I like to look at is that the head is as clean and as light as possible as well, and there's no over darkening in the fins. When it actually comes to the head in these young Matsubas, what you will see a lot of is elements around the side of the face and the top of the head where you can actually see the brain and the gills underneath. Now that's because because at this point the skin isn't thick enough. As the skin thickens, eventually that's just going to disappear and get the plain red head. What I also pay attention to is not wanting them too dark in colour at this age. The bright red ones that you love to see, most of these will get there in the end. Genetically, they have the colour potential to do it, so don't panic. It's all in the art of the raising from this point onwards to get them up to that level.
This one for me is a solid example because for hobbyists looking at this, there's a lot less risk, so it's not so underdeveloped that there's a chance, you know, it never fully materialises. It often does, but you reduce that risk. The head's nice and clean. You can see the brain part there again. There's an element of lightness to it. You can see the scale separation. All them attributes are really important, so I think that's in a really good place for a hobbyist who don't want to take too much of a gamble to take that and grow it on further. So this is one for me that I'm considering prime for me to grow on. We've got the lightness in the back. You see the Amime and the Matsubamon is just pushing through the back enough that it's giving me reassurance we're going to get good development there. Structurally it's very good, strong head. It's got a lean body at the moment, which we expect at this point because they're busy growing in length. And a lean body is a characteristic of this bloodline and Asagi naturally, which is ultimately what they are.
So in and amongst the batch, there are some we will actually see that are regressing back to their Asagi roots. That's not the typical way that an Asagi develops, but it is possible in there.
This is actually reverting back to Asagi, where they originate from. So you can see all the blue starting to come in amongst the scales.
So in amongst them, as I am looking just roughly for ultimate colour consistency, if there's a lighter patch somewhere, it could indicate that that's actually going to go backwards into some form of Asagi, or actually go even further than that as well.
See there, there's like a line in the black. There's a high chance from my experience that that never actually fills in because its development is inconsistent with the rest of the fish look. Just there, it's actually two scales within the alignment that haven't developed the black, and there's a chance they never will, and that'll just become more and more prominent as the fish gets bigger.
There's been a couple in the batch that I really like, that I will continue to grow, and some that just aren't what I'm looking for at this moment, although they could become really unique sort of Kawari Asagi pieces or something like that in the future. Also amongst the batch, there's a very few rare items as well. Doitsu Akamatsuba with the kind of Aragoke scale formation. Not many at all, and I'm excited to raise these. A couple of years ago, I actually got my hands on a batch of Asagi only from Otsuka. The first time in over 20 years I've managed it, and in amongst them was one of these Doitsu Asagis, if you like, or Aragoke Asagis. It was absolutely phenomenal as it raised. What I see in these as they grow and the colour intensity really comes, they're going to look totally unique, and I can't actually wait to see the results of those few, but there really is just a small handful. The pond itself have been well documented, but it's a 1200 gallon pond. They're currently heated at 25 degrees, although that naturally rises on the hot days like we're having currently. Now the feeding program at the moment being Tosai, they're being fed every 2 hours via the feeder from 6 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, with that being monitored to hopefully get them within a 10-minute feeding window. That's been difficult as it stands because the stocking levels become so much in the pond that getting to that is almost impossible without completely tanking the water and managing the oxygen levels. So I expect these, they're going to actually be grown the whole season in this pond, but I do expect eventually we'll be hitting sizes of around 40 centimeters before we know it. They're not going to hold back. These ponds do a phenomenal job on a very simple system that's brush chamber filtration with a K1 based fluid bed, and air at the moment directly injected into the fluid bed, and a spray bar return. They work an absolute treat. The simplicity is phenomenal. Just want to show you an example here of the level of selection to understand how rigorous I'm being more than anything. Now, not too tight at the moment because they need a little bit more growth so I can fully understand what's going on within the scale pattern of the fish. The lighter ones, I'm primarily looking at the head and the fins, the Amime and Matsubamon in the back. I can't assess at the moment. The ones that are a bit darker, I am assessing. But if we take this sample here in the bowl, 36 fish in here at the moment. As I've whittled through these, we've come down to 13 fish overall. So you can see there the level of strictness. You also have to apply that when you're looking at the fish or trying to get some idea of where these fish sit in the marketplace. Understand I'm being super strict on the numbers and not necessarily taking all the best ones, as some people often seem to think. This is a natural process. The breeders are doing the same here because I have to be strict. I'm about to commercially invest a lot of money in raising these fish through to the right kind of size. It costs a lot of money for for us to do it, and I need to ensure those fish can command the best market value. What that does mean in such a big batch is that within the fish I release from this pond today, there's going to be a lot in there that will make very good fish, certainly relative to the price point for you to grow and grow on. But this is a great example for you to see how a bowl whittles down to what I'm going to keep. Finally, we see the selection here. These in the bowl are the fish that I am going to be growing on further. You can see a nice mix of everything in here, the lighter ones, the bit darker ones. My best tip is just to study this footage and truly understand, look closely at the characteristics, and just train your eye. As much as you like to listen to the information, the way I've always learned, and the best way, is by looking, watching, seeing. Let your eyes soak it up and put it into practice if you can. Follow that methodology from Otsuka. Buy the many, not the one. Grow them and learn from it. That's not even just with these varieties. Getting involved in Tosai, growing them and learning from them is just a great philosophy you can pass into your koi keeping journey to sharpen up those selection skills overall. Now, these are going to get all released back in. We'll get a final count. Today they're sizing up at 18 to 22 centimeters like we mentioned, and now with the stocking level as good as half, they're going to really push on from this point, and at the next selection we'll see where they're at, and I'll be paying a lot more attention and detail to some of the finer characteristics at that point, and we'll catch up on them then.